And then today, maybe to beginning also already, now we are just mentioning that we will be recording this event. So hopefully that will be good, fine for everybody. And if you, but please let us know if there are any problems. But in addition to the team, this lounge has been also supported by our colleagues from Geneva IFRC, as well as a number of youth volunteers. We will also have colleagues from UNICEF, World Vision, ASEAN, and Timor-Leste Red Cross Social Society joining us in the panel discussion later in this event. But we are very happy to have so many of you already joining this event. We would also like to invite you, all the participants, to introduce yourself in the chat box. So it would be wonderful if you can write your name, the organization you are representing, if you are representing an organization, as well as the location where you are coming from to this event. So thank you very much. It's nice to know who all we are in this room today. And while we are welcoming everybody to have their cameras on, that's be nice to see everybody, we would be also asking you to keep your microphones unmuted during the presentation. We will have time for questions and answers during this event as well as in the end. So we would, of course, very much welcome you. If there be any questions, welcome you to raise them either by raising your hand or just writing your questions to the chat box, and we will pick up them there and address them as much as we can today. So welcome to the launch of the research. We need to do better climate-related disasters and child protection in Southeast Asia. This research was conducted in 2021 by the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies in cooperation with the Global Child Protection Area of Responsibility, CBAOR. This is part of a joint project aiming to strengthen preparedness and government leadership in the child protection in emergencies. The research is also part of the IFRC global campaign, We Need to Do Better. We Need to Do Better campaign is focusing on enhancing child protection in climate-related disasters in particular. Our global report, We Need to Do Better, policy brief for enhancing laws and regulations to protect children in disasters. That report was released in 2020, and that report already, the global report, was highlighting the vast need to improve the content of the domestic laws and legislations for child protection, as well as implementation of the laws in emergencies related in this climate disaster, but also in general the child protection related legislation. As we witness climate-related disasters becoming more and more frequent and intense, we in the IFRC have been wanting to hear from the children and youth themselves, how they feel about their protection, which gaps or opportunities they see, and then again, how do they feel that they are involved in the decisions that concern them, especially and actions on preparedness and response to climate-related disasters. So we did, through a survey, reach almost 30,000 youth, and this information was again complemented by the literature review as well as consultation of stakeholders. So this research has been proven to be truly a joint effort, to which so many of you also participating here have been contributing. We have been relying on incredibly motivated and active youth volunteers and very many humanitarian and development practitioners who have been supporting this research by contributing with their concerns, suggestions, knowledge and suggestions, but also supporting the outreach, the regional outreach of the research. So all these contributions have been extremely valuable, and we are truly grateful for all that support. We will start this launch event by discussing about introducing into the key findings of the report. So I will now next give the floor to Audrey Otley, who will introduce the background of the report. Why did we end up doing that? And then also the methodology, as well as the key findings of the report. After the introductions, we will go to the panel discussion, and then we will have the questions and answers. Audrey has been joined the IFRC BGI team in Geneva in 2020 as a consultant to support partnerships in child protection, in particular the partnership with Child Protection Area of Responsibility, UNICEF, and the Partnership to End Violence in 2020. In this capacity, she has been also focused on child protection programming in emergency preparedness and response, and has been leading the research for this study from Geneva, where she is based. After Audrey, we will also hear from Grace Patia, one of the incredibly motivated and active Red Cross volunteers who has been supporting and contributing to this research throughout the process, and will also today present or share her perspectives. I hear some pressure. Can you unmute, please? Thank you. Grace is a junior Thai Chinese in the Thai Chinese International School, and a very strong advocate for youth empowerment and climate action. Grace was also selected as a Thai Red Cross youth representative in the Southeast Asia Youth Network, and has been a delegate for United Nations Youth for Climate event. She is also a founding member of the Peace by Youth Network in Thailand. Audrey and Grace, over to you, to your presentation on the research.
Thank you very much, Hanna-Lena, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today and to contribute some tips and learnings that we got through our research on how to improve climate-related disasters and child protection. Mariko, could you please switch to the next slide? Okay, so I'm Audrey, and I will introduce you to the reasons why we decided to launch such a research. And maybe just to set the scene, we had the most recent IPCC report launched just 6 months, and for the first time, clearly qualifying climate change as contributing to humanitarian crisis. I know that many of you are already familiar with the topic, and that it's already widely acknowledged that climate change is first and foremost a child rights crisis. And still, we also know that in our own organizations, but also what we heard from other colleagues, and no matter where you sit, whether you are in the field in coordination positions, we all know there are many challenges to ensure that children have the right to participate meaningfully in the actions that we undertake to ensure their protection. And we also know that children are too rarely consulted. This is one of the reasons why IFRC built up this campaign around we need to do better. And we initiated regional studies, and specifically at child protection and climate-related disasters. This one being the first regional one completed in Southeast Asia, last year, and while 2 other ones have also been carried out in the Caribbean so far, as well as in Eastern and Southern Africa, with also a launch coming up soon. So this is our first sharing of the findings. And on the next slide, please, Mariko, we would like to introduce you to why and how we carried it out. So knowing that children are rarely consulted, we decided to hear from them directly about their perception, their understanding of climate change and climate-related disasters, the worries they have, the actions they would like to take, and how much they are or not actually already involved in discussions and actions around climate-related disasters and child protection specifically. So we started looking at your region, as I said, Southeast Asia, because it's a region that is already highly vulnerable to climate change and climate-related disasters. The region also has a very young population, I think with children representing between 12 and 52% of the population across different countries, counting overall for approximately 202 million children. And we also know that violence against children is particularly prevalent. Just to share a couple of estimates, for instance, on physical abuse, the range that is quantified is between 10 to 30% of children experiencing physical abuse. And when it comes to emotional abuse, the numbers go up between 30 and 70% of children. So we know that children are already at risk. Yet we also know that comprehensive laws are not in place or implemented in a way to protect them from violence, abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And also, with so many disasters, including those related to climate change, the systems to protect children are under strain. So we wanted to hear from the children how they felt about all of this. And we developed an online survey to gather their perspectives. On the next slide, I'll elaborate a little more about the methodology. So as I said, the analysis is mostly centered around an online survey where more than 33,000 children and young respondents contributed. And in addition, 55 adult stakeholders, be it from the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, UNICEF, local and international non-governmental NGOs, all contributed to interviews. Initially, our objective was really to set up focus groups discussion with youth, especially those most marginalized in each country. And we were expecting to use randomized samples, but this being launched during the COVID pandemic, obviously we faced various challenges and we had to adjust our methodology as we progressed. And we eventually fell back on convenient sampling for the interviews with the partners and youth, as many were already stretched or overwhelmed with the COVID response. And it was really hard to get people also to contribute to interviews. Interestingly, we were very concerned about the survey fatigue at the time. And still, it was quite a surprise to see so many responses coming in. As I said, we had more than 30,000 only young respondents taking up the survey that was simply disseminated through social media, widely publicized on the internet, and obviously disseminated through many climate-related or child protection-related organizations in the field. But still, it was quite a surprise to see how picked up it was and how many responses we received. And in particular, maybe to highlight another limitation, most of the responses were coming from the Philippines and Vietnam, and they represent about 80% of the total number from young people. And it's interesting also because these are two of the countries that are particularly regularly impacted by the disasters. And maybe another limitation to highlight at this stage is also, as we said, we had to fall back on an online survey, which means that eventually the information that has been analyzed and that I will present now is merely indicative of the opinions of the children and young respondents who were not only able to connect online, had the capacity to, had the physical means to connect, had the capacity to go through these questions were reached by or requests to contribute, and they filled out their responses without face-to-face consultations taking place to really deepen the topic. But the survey contained both open and closed questions, and I must say that the participants were particularly prolific in sharing their thoughts. And you can see through the reports that many quotes were gathered through. Also, we had the survey translated in as many languages as the countries of the region. So maybe some nuances have been lost in translation, but we will see that the messages from young people are very, very strong and clear. Next slide, please, Mariko. So maybe let's move on to sharing, to asking you where you fit on those topics, because this will give us an idea and see whether this is comparable to what the youth have shared with us. We have a couple of questions that should be shared, and let me know if you have any difficulty accessing. It should be opening up on your screen now. I'll just give you 1 minute to go through it and then look at the results. Okay, so it's about your own knowledge on the topics of child protection, education, and climate-related disasters. And we have very divided results. I would say most of you, or the majority, no, although it's tighting. It's split between climate-related disasters, a bit more than one topic, split between child protection and education. And only 2% of the attendants feeling knowledgeable about all of those topics, which is a very strong indicator of how specialized we can be in our work or in our readings. Next question.
Sorry, Audrey. Now I share the result to the participants. I think you only see the result at that time. Yeah, now I'm showing the result.
Thanks, Mariko.
Shall we go to the question number 2?
Yes.
Okay.
So the second question is on the linkages between child protection again with education, child protection and climate-related disasters, and climate-related disasters and education. And I should see the results. Mariko, do you already have the result? Thank you. So here we see that half of the participants to this webinar have some clarity about the linkages between climate-related disasters and child protection, while for others it's a little more on education and child protection than climate-related disasters and education. Okay, and then we have one more question for you. And the last question is about integration of these topics. We know we tend to work in silo, so I just would like to see how familiar you are integrating either 2 of those topics together or even more maybe. Michael, whenever you have the results, please go ahead. Thank you. So again, the results are very split among each category. I think that a good quarter of us are not used to integrating any of these topics, which is a strong indicator that we are mainly focusing on our own sector or area of work or interest. And only 20%, actually, it's a good number, 20% are integrating the three, and others are, I would say, roughly in the same proportions, integrating either child protection and education, or child protection and climate-related disasters, or education and climate-related disasters. I think overall from these questions, we see that there are some positive signs that the community is looking at all those topics together and ensuring that we work hand in hand. But there is still a lot of work to do to make sure that this becomes a systematic response. And actually, this is one of the reasons why we were reaching out to the youth to understand also from their perspectives, is it common, is it something that they think of as related topic having an impact one on the other. And on the next slide, I wanted to start sharing with you some of the results from the consultation, because I believe it's extremely informative, and it will encourage us all to address shared concerns and also ensure the meaningful participation and engagement of youth throughout the disaster risk management continuum. So first of all, children and youth who contributed to the survey stated that they have a good understanding of climate change and climate-related disasters. For them, climate change and climate-related disasters were understood in equal proportions, suggesting that they perceive them as strongly correlated. And unsurprisingly, children not attending school self-assessed a lower level of understanding of those issues. But overall, an overwhelming majority of children, about 90%, indicating having those issues in mind, and a third of them thinking of those issues often. 90% of the respondents also believed that the natural disasters they had experienced in their own communities had been caused by climate change. And I think this is also something that a recent IPCC report highlighted about how the impact has already been felt and unfortunately will continue to increase. On the next slide, I will share about children's concern, and you will understand that it's not really a surprise that almost all of them, 93% actually, shared some level of concern. Mariko, please, if you can change the slide. So 93% are concerned about climate change and disasters related to climate change. And when they shared additional comments, the responses highlighted really widespread climate anxiety, fear of climate-related disasters leading to the extinction of humans and the end of the world. So some of the comments were really strong and powerful. And a majority of the respondents also considered that disasters related to climate change either influence or highly influence the risk of physical or mental abuse to children and young people. So it's therefore natural for them to consider that climate change, climate-related disasters, and child protection and education are and should be considered as integrated. And I just wanted to let you reflect on your own perspectives earlier and what you're already doing or wishing to do within your organizations. For children and youth, this was taken for granted, and they were actually happy that we asked them about those topics and they could make those interactions. Now, on the next slide, what are the challenges that they face? Obviously, we also, sorry, one more, Mariko. Oh no, sorry, can you go back? I don't know if you can. Yeah, so I'm not gonna go into detail, but I just wanted to share here with you some of the risks related to child protection that children and youth shared with us within different exchange events. you see a word cloud where we ask them the different risks in terms of violence, abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And education came up. As you can see, it's one of the strongest words highlighted. But they were also able to list other challenges and other risks that children face in emergencies. And on the next one, +1, you will see I will not dedicate much time on it. But Mariko, if you could jump to 2 slides further, we see also how aware they are about the impact on schools and overall access and continuity of education in relation to disasters. They highlighted a lot of issues related to infrastructure, economy, lack of time, decreased level of standards leading to dropout, and overall keeping children behind. So those issues are very clear for them and really highlight why they think those sectors could be integrated and considered together. And so then we asked them what they wanted to do better. One more slide, please, Mariko, to tackle these challenges and ensure better child protection. And the most common barriers that was highlighted was about attempting to act for better child protection or to act against climate change and climate-related disasters. It was about not knowing where to start. This was 34% of the answers saying, basically, we want to act, we just don't know how or how to start engaging in those topics. Also, 90% of the respondents wanted to learn ways to have a plan to remain safe in case of disasters. So this is what they face. Now, still, on the next slide, we'll see that there is some hope around participation. 33% of them considered that someone their age can actually make a difference. And most of them actually have already taken action in the past 2 years, even in COVID time. And that's something I wanted to highlight. So the majority indicated having some opportunities to participate in sharing concerns and ideas. And one particular wish they had was that schools could be better equipped to raise awareness and help them act on climate change and related disasters, not just to evacuate and know how to react, to do some first action, but also to know how to protect themselves from violence and abuse once they've evacuated and sought refuge, for instance, in a shelter. In particular for this, the learning they would like to have would be around developing plans to remain safe. That was 60% of the respondents. 52% also wanted to know where to get help and how to get help if needed. And then obviously they also wanted to participate in decision-making that affects their physical and mental well-being. That was 37% of them. Yet, in addition to that, children as well as practitioners also highlighted gaps in support services. I think this is general about protection services, notably for survivors of violence and sexual exploitation, but also lack of awareness and some gaps to recognize, for young people to recognize themselves as victims of violence or abuse, and consequently to seek support. So on the next slide, we have highlighted some key recommendations that came from the research. And I think the first one was really about recognizing the impact that climate change is already having and will continue to have, even at an increased scale, on the children. Then obviously around prioritizing child participation, that can be at all the stages of the work we do, and ensuring in particular that children most marginalized also have a voice, and that we develop spaces for them to discuss their concerns and ideas to stay safe. Obviously, there is a lot to do in terms of improving access to support services, be it protection or education, because we know that this is really a safety net, and that without those services, it's hard to prevent, mitigate, and respond to the violations. Then on the next slide, we also see that there is a lot of work to continue being done around the development of policies, laws, regulations around the legislative framework in general, especially in cases of disasters. And eventually, for those actions to have meaningful effects, we need to strengthen coordination among ourselves, different actors, but also among different sectors working hand in hand together. And you'll hear more about that later. Then finally, we also want to ensure that child protection is a key consideration when we are doing preparedness and where it's already ongoing anticipatory action. So these were some key findings from the research. I'll be happy to take more questions if you have later. And for now, I would like to hand over to Grace from Thailand, who will give you her perspective on why she decided to contribute and how this manifested in her life and all the actions she's taken. Thank you very much. Over to you, Grace.
Thank you so much, Audrey. Thank you for having me here. My name is Grace. I'm an advocate for climate justice as well as youth empowerment. I've been to the Youth for Climate as a Thai representative. It's a youth conference that we come together and draft a youth manifesto about climate change to send it to COP26. And without further ado, could you please skip to the next slide so I can start? So first of all, why did I join and contribute to this study in the first place? There were 3 reasons. The first reason is that when I think to myself, I think that I want my voice to be heard. I want young people's voice to be heard and let multiple sectors hear these voices and let it reflect to their work. Therefore, there's no doubt for me on that point that I really want to participate and make my voice heard. And second point is that I want to get some relief from my eco-anxiety, because since I was younger, like Audrey said in her study, that young people are having more anxiety and worried about their future, whether it's affecting them now or the upcoming future. And thirdly, because it is very important to have appropriate solution to the ongoing problem of young youth participation in relation to climate change related disasters, because stronger analysis of scientific data would definitely bring appropriate response and tackle the root causes of this problem. And just one key recommendation I would suggest is for us to gather an equal number of children surveyed across each country in Southeast Asia. Since we want to generalize children from Southeast Asia, maybe we could get equal amounts by getting 50 from Thailand, 50 from Malaysia, and then we can do intersectional analysis that points out which country is already doing well and which country should improve on. And lastly, about this study, I would say that noteworthy comments I had on my side was that it's my first time having an interview, and that interview is not an interview, it's a discussion. We really had fruitful conversations, and it really relieved my eco-anxiety just by a bit, because I'm never able to talk to someone and without any limitations. And another key thing that I want to note is that by joining these Youth for Climate conference and looking at multilateral dialogues and listening to these dialogues and seeing these policies, it's very interesting for me to see on another side where there's these research and data points that actually reflect these policies. And reflecting at the study that was conducted, it is actually evidence-based research that actually would sure be a path towards appropriate response later on. And next up, I will be talking about, so in this study, something that resonates in multilateral policies as well as in this study is climate change education. And I totally agree with this perspective on behalf of young people's voice, because climate change education is very important. It brings us intergenerational justice. It makes our generation become more ready by knowing how to adapt and to mitigate against climate change and other related inequalities that follow us. For example, children's rights and violence prevention. We shouldn't work in silos. We have to look at the holistic approach, just like the poll we've seen. And to exemplify, a Thai friend of mine founded an NGO that educates young people, whether they're indigenous, from low kind of low-income communities and migrants regarding climate change. And what she did is very important because she educates these students by basing it on their areas and also giving them projects, the things that they can work hand on, and also including multiple disciplines like the inequality that stems from climate change or biodiversity loss. And moving on to the next slide, I actually have firsthand experience with being able to have climate change education since I was in camp. And I would say that without a doubt that climate change education really made me aware and made me empowered to do more climate action. And even speaking here today, climate change education would surely empower young people to take action. And this is a fact. And moving on to the next topic about meaningful youth engagement. After Youth for Climate conference, I was able to have opportunity to do multiple high-level engagements. And it is totally different from working hand in hand with other generations or other groups. When you engage in high-level engagements by merely talking, it's not really productive, although I've been presenting it to them, but then I cannot measure how impactful my speech is to them or measure what follow-up activities they will do when I just spoke, because it's just a mere presentation. And it doesn't make me feel like it's true climate action. It doesn't make me relieved from the climate anxiety I have. But what relieves me from climate anxiety is the fact that I'm able to work hand in hand with stakeholders. By being able to devote my time and effort into making projects along with other stakeholders, it really made me feel that I'm engaged and actually made me have like intergenerational understanding with other generations. And for the next slide, I want to point out about the challenges about climate change education as well as youth engagement. Just previously, we can see that although I've been engaged in many climate work, but I've experienced tokenization from utilizing or from other people taking advantage of young people and using it as to bolster their reputation, but doesn't really meaningfully want them to do their project. And this is a challenge that I personally have been through. The fact that, so I've been invited into to work on and assigned to work on doing a project with them. And it's a very credible organization. And my friends, my youth network and I worked very hard. We devote our time and effort in doing the project, and we presented to them. And they responded very welcomely that it's very possible to happen. But after that onwards, there was no response coming back. And then, yes, and there was no response coming back. I felt very discouraged. I didn't have a feeling to go for. Right now, even I don't have the motivation to now. I'm kind of discouraged not to get support from other organizations because the amount of time and effort my friends and I devoted into that is we had to sacrifice our time, effort, and also our schoolwork. We have schoolwork even, and to help our future, to help our environment, but wasn't really taken into consideration or even knowing what the reason why we weren't considered. So that is why I do not want this to happen at all. Meaningful engagement with youth and climate change is very important. And it's not about only engagement, but it's also about financing and more research into this. And the second challenge in education and youth engagement would be the lack of safe spaces for children to interact, learn, and take climate action. And this actually happens to me. When I was firstly in this climate action network, I didn't know where to start. And this resonates in the study that young people don't know where to start. Like climate action for some areas is kind of a niche. Only people in the network are allowed to do climate work, but that should not be have access to climate action. And these are the challenges. And please go on to the next slide. I want to end my presentation with the quote, what you do makes a difference, and what you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. So this young girl in this neon shirt, I've seen her, I've heard from her recently. She's a youth advocate for climate change, for climate action in Thailand. I heard her from a UN conference, and she kind of shared her experience about her life in this climate work. She said that since she was 8 years old, she began looking at her environment, and she was very depressed because she didn't want to live in the world where people are harming the environment and just discriminating young people. So at 8 years old, only 8 years old, she began lobbying the government. She protested daily, as well as doing projects with her youth network. But the result she got was that other people, other groups of people, or other generations said to her that, why don't you just go back to school, go and learn? This is not a school assignment. It's not your job to do this. Let the other generations do it instead. But when she heard this, she didn't stop there. She persevered, she persisted, and she fought against that until just recently, this Thai student is actually one big influence that made Thailand impose restrictions on plastic bags. And wow, by listening to her, I feel that she proved to us young people that we can actually do something, even when she's so young at such an early age, even with such difficult circumstances. And she showed that we all have capabilities, and we all should pursue for climate action, no matter how big or small it is. The next slide would be my end of presentation. If you would like to connect and have a chat about, these discussions, you feel free to connect with me. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Audrey and Grace, for the presentation and very interesting findings and reviews. It's truly it's inspiring how actively youth have been participating and raising their voices, but also it's very concerning or worrying that the concerns are also very very large and vast. So this is actually also in line with our earlier and global studies, where we actually do need to put so much increased attention to the voices of the youth and participate them at every level. Thanks so much. We will take the questions maybe later, but let's go to the panel discussion now. I would like to invite Mark Brian Young to moderate and facilitate the discussion and introduce our panelists. Mark is joining us from Philippines. He's a licensed professional teacher, but also acts as a youth leader for the Red Cross and Red Crescent Southeast Asian Youth Network. He has been also the president of the Philippine Red Cross National Youth Council, and had been also contributing to this research throughout the process. So thanks already this far for all your support, Mark, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Annalena, and wonderful day, wonderful afternoon, wonderful evening to all of our participants in this Zoom meeting room. And a wonderful, wonderful discussion from Audrey and Grace. Grace is my colleague in the Southeast Asian Youth Network. Really wonderful emphasis on how youth and children are important in especially in emergencies and climate action. So at this point, we'll be hearing from 4 distinct guests for this afternoon's launch webinar from different perspectives from different organizations. So we have Ms. Befita Dwi Mitriawati from Asia Pacific Coalition for School Safety. And we also have Dr. Yanti Jalante from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the head of Disaster Management and Humanitarian Assistance Division, Assistant Director for Sustainable Development Directorate of the ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community Department, ASEAN Secretariat. And we also have from one of the national societies of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, Vicente da Silva Antonio. He is the Child Protection Focal Point in Red Cross Timor-Leste. And Ms. Darren Chong from UNICEF, a consultant for child protection and emergencies, UNICEF East Asia and Pacific Regional Office. So let's welcome them with a virtual round of applause. You can just click an emoji there and let's welcome them, because we will be hearing a lot from them about child protection in emergencies. So to start the ball rolling, I would like to ask our first question for our panelist, Ms. Befita from the APCSF. Hello, Ms. Befita.
Hello, Mark. Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon. So could you tell us more about the children and youth consultation that you did on climate disasters from the perspective of APCSS and some of its key findings?
Okay, so basically we organized child and youth consultation as part of a regular event, considering about the preparation as well for the Asia Pacific Ministry Conference for Disaster Risk Reduction. So we consider that the child participation and also the children and youth voices is actually the key point that need to be considered whenever UNDRR probably the high level ministry to think about, to be really consider to take action as part of the action plan. So as this is the collective action. So World Vision is actually supporting the APCSS, organize the consultation at the national and also doing the online survey. So it's not only share the view or thought, but also like share the recommendation to the government and some of the collective statement as well. So the key finding, there's a lot of to be shared actually about the key finding, and us actually see a lot of similarity with the recent study conducted by IFRC as well. So I'm going to share like the key finding from our result in 2020. The first key finding is related about the impact of disaster and climate change to the children and youth. 5 top concerns. The first one about the climate crisis. The second one about access to education. The third one is access to the work employment. I think this is because they talking about the future impact as well. And the fourth one also about the protection and safety from disaster impact. And the fifth one about the access to the basic need. So this survey or the child and youth consultation, actually from the children and youth perspective, they have experienced within a year, they have noticed a lot of disaster happen in their area, and 50% of that is a climate-related hazard. And additionally, when we did the child and youth consultation at the regional level, there is one key finding related the impact to the mental health and psychosocial support. There's a strong urgent need for that. And the second key finding is actually the call for the inclusive approach. Children and youth say that they are actually the most vulnerable group in terms of the climate and also disaster impact. But they also acknowledge that children and youth with disability also the most vulnerable one, including the elderly. So they also acknowledge that they actually also need inclusive approach, access to material, so it will strengthen their preparedness skill. And also in the key, another key finding, we also acknowledge that children and youth say that formal education is still a major channel to learn about the climate change and disaster risks. Though they also mentioned about another channel like the social media or also the news. And they recommend actually the government to develop the curriculum about this resilient building and also DRR and climate change topic as part of the school syllabus. And the key finding number 4, it is actually the urgent call to mainstream localize children and youth voices in the climate discussion. So I think I'm actually very excited to hear Grace actually sharing this, because during our consultation as well, the children and youth actually calling that we need to be empowered. You need to give us space to be heard and involved. And for us, it's actually acknowledging that children and youth actually recognize their potential as an agent of change to influence their peer group, and also contributing to build actually the community resilience. So they're actually encouraging the government or other stakeholders to strengthen or probably provide more platform, more child-friendly platform, communication channel between the policymaker and also children and youth. So we have identified the key 3 recommendations for that. So the first one is actually inclusive platform for children and youth to speak and contribute in the decision-making process. And the second one is actually having DRR climate change adaptation as a formal education and in the school curricula, including the inclusive approach, improve access to the disabled people with disability, and also empower children and youth to take action to address climate crisis and disaster risk. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Befita, for those responses. Indeed, we need to provide inclusive platform, especially for children and youth, since Befita has mentioned that children and young people are one of the vulnerable groups, the most vulnerable groups in terms of emergencies and disasters. And Befita also mentioned that the consultation that they did was in preparation for the ASEAN conference on DRR. And speaking of ASEAN, we also have our guest from the ASEAN Secretariat. We have Dr. Rianti. Dr. Rianti?
Yes, thank you, moderator. Thank you, Mr. Mark, and IFRC for inviting ASEAN Secretariat to have our intervention here. Due to the time constraint, I will have to do my in a briefer format. Let us allow to highlight development or some implementation of disaster child and youth relevant programming within the ASEAN Secretariat. So first of all, we have ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response, which is implemented through its 5-year work program. So in 2021-2025 period, one of the principles on the implementation of the work program is focusing on the most vulnerable groups, but of course, not only considering them as the most vulnerable groups, but also active agent of change. In addition, last year, ASEAN adopted regional framework on protection, gender, and inclusion in disaster management 2021-2025. So what we see here, PGI framework, so protection, gender, and inclusion frameworks provides an overview on how we can implement the ASEAN Community Blueprint, with respect to the prevention and protection of GBV, children protection, disability inclusion under these pillars of PGI. In addition, related to schooling, we have ASEAN Common Framework on Comprehensive Safety School. We have many of our partners involved in this project. We continue to implement ASEAN Safe School initiative. And in addition, in terms of key specific studies that we have a study on responsibility to prevent and respond to sexual and gender-based violence in 2020 and 2017, and also continuing this year. We also looked at or produced a guideline on disaster responsive social protection, which then continue this year on our forthcoming work on strengthening anticipatory action in disaster management. This is very important because ASEAN envisioned to be the global leaders in disaster management, and so having focusing on particular groups such as the youth group on impacts of disasters, how they can be active agents of change, and also lastly, our program on monitoring and evaluation of the implementation. So we want to ensure that gender and age and disability disaggregated data are measured and recorded. So putting all this together, we hope to strengthen the implementation of child and youth related issues in disasters and climate change in a comprehensive manner. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Rianti, for that intervention. Well, we have heard from Dr. Rianti of the work plan from the ASEAN Secretariat, and it's evident from what Dr. Rianti has said that the issue or the concern on child protection in emergencies and the integration of that into ERR and CCA is multifaceted. It's not just a one-shot deal. You have to address something about sexual and gender-based violence in how to continue the educational experiences of young children and the youth in times of disaster. So thank you very much, Dr. Rianti, for sharing with us the work plan of the ASEAN in PRR. So with that, we have heard from the ASEAN perspective. We will now hear from a national perspective from one of our national societies, and that will be from the Timor-Leste Red Cross. We have with us Sir Vicente, Mr. Vicente de la Silva.
Yes, thanks, Mark.
So Vicente, welcome to our launch webinar. Let me ask you a question. If in Timor-Leste Red Cross, what were the different interventions that you were able to do, which is related in child protection? Because we have heard that there are, similar to other Southeast Asian countries, a lot of disasters, which are climate related, that have stricken our country. So what are the different interventions that you have done so
far? Thank you, Mark. I think for the child and youth in Timor-Leste related with the in emergency. So for our national society, firstly, in our national society, we need to have our policy of the child protection and safeguarding, and also code of conduct for our volunteer and for our staff, and make sure that everyone, for all staff and our volunteer, have knowledge to intervene during the emergency, or how to respond in the emergency. So firstly, we hope that our staff and our volunteer about the child protection policy and code of conduct, or sign before become as a volunteer and also become as a staff in our national society, Red Cross. And also for the during the response, like for the how to link with the emergency response with the child protection. So we go with we know that in the emergency disaster or another like issue related with the health, like COVID. So it's mean that the children and youth and also vulnerable people is they're really affect in the in the emergency. So for the child protection is also the one important, because in the evacuation center, in there we face the mostly is the number of the children and youth in the shelter. So through the our assessment, through our list of the like for the analysis, we need to consider the all tools that link with the child protection. It mean that the all staff and all volunteer, they already know how to intervention respond to the emergency. So I just share my experience on the youth intervention in the flooding that in the 2 years ago. So the big flooding in Timor-Leste. So firstly we face the challenges, but through the challenges we learning and they find the solution. One solution that like for the access for the children, like the space for the children, how to make them calm and how to do the some activity to make the children and youth calm during in the shelter or in the evacuation center. So that's our real situation that we do during in the emergency right now in our national society. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Vicente, for those responses. I liked how you emphasized on educating not just the volunteers, but as well as the staff and everybody that is involved in the interventions that we roll out in child protection and emergencies. Because of course, we cannot do something that we don't know. So it starts with educating not just ourselves, but also the people that we work with.
Yeah.
So thank you again, Vicente, for
Yes.
this. Now let us move on to
Thank you.
another guest that we have for this morning from UNICEF, Miss Dareen.
Hi, everyone. Hello, Mark.
Hello, Dareen. Now, we have here a question for you, focusing on the integration of child protection into emergencies and climate action intervention. So what are the key considerations for the successful integration, hearing that there's a lot of areas to grow and improve in child participation and making sure that the needs of the children are taken care of? So what are these key considerations for the successful integration?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. First of all, it's a great pleasure to join this panel today, and thanks for the opportunity to speak on this important topic today. I think we all know that climate change is a global issue that affects everyone on Earth. However, we still seem to understand less and talk less about its impact on children, their development, their protection, and we need to act now than later and together than alone. So if you ask me what is important for us to consider in mainstreaming and integrating child protection into climate-related actions, I think the very first step is to have a deep understanding of the various risk factors that exist across the different levels of a socio-ecological model and how children are uniquely vulnerable to these risks that are often interconnected and highly complex. And in the process of analyzing and identifying these risks and needs and strategic planning, we need increased engagement with the children and their communities in a meaningful way. increasing their awareness, increasing their capacity, and building partnerships with them, including them in the decision-making processes related to climate change from community-level DRR to national-level DRM policies. So recognizing the consequences of climate change on children, the government and disaster agencies needed to invest more in prevention and anticipatory actions to mitigate the risks and prevent child protection violations. And to bring these considerations into action, coordination is essential across the sectors at national and subnational level. Humanitarian and development actors joining the forces together, bridging the nexus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doreen. So I think what I was able to get from that is one of the key factors for us to integrate child protection in climate-related emergency response is, of course, the institutionalization of interventions through policy advocacy. Because, of course, if we have policies for it, people will be somehow obliged to move and to do something about it. And it's also important to ensure that coordination across stakeholders are in place as well. Because if one system is not working, then our integration might. So thank you very much for that, Doreen. I'll get back to you again later for another question. But before that, let me talk again to Befita. Befita, are you there? Yes, hi. Yes, Befita. So when we talk about children and young people, most of them are in school, right? And we do not know when disasters and emergency will strike, especially since things are aggravated by climate change. That's why we are speaking of climate change more and more. And that's what, as what Doreen has said, we need to talk about it more. So how do we integrate these concepts in school safety framework, since, again, children and young people are mostly in school?
So basically what we did at the moment from the APSSS, we are supporting and also coordinate with the GATRES, Global Alliance for Disaster Risk Reduction and Resilience in Education sector. We are now in the process to revise the comprehensive safe school framework to be utilized till 2030. So previously in the comprehensive safe school framework, we acknowledge the coordination, the integration between education sector and also disaster management. But now, considering the risk or the vulnerability of the children, in the current revision, we also acknowledge within the context about the climate change impact, and also the risk and vulnerability factor about the violence and harm to the children as well. And within that, in the current revision of the CSS framework, we want to bring together the child protection, education, and also disaster management sector during the revision process, because in the previous framework, we only acknowledge or probably strengthening our approach about having the school-based disaster management plan. But now we know that even after the children and youth consultation, right, we need to have education continuity plan as well as the protection plan, because we also acknowledge the harm, violence, the protection issue is there at the school level. So this is what we did at the moment. We are now still in the phase of finalizing the framework, and it is expected to be launched in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Befita. So indeed, ensuring that children and young people are safe in schools is one of the key factors when we talk about child protection and emergencies. Because again, we don't know when and where these things will strike. And it's important that we ensure that our children and young people are safe. So we could start with school-based disaster management plan. And of course, the education continuity, because in emergencies and disasters, education is halted since schools are used as evacuation centers and as response centers, and protection plan as well, because vulnerability increases when there is a disaster and emergency. That's why we have this program, or we have this interventions called as climate smart programming, where we integrate climate action principles into the programs that we roll out. So thank you very much for that, Befita.
Thank you.
Next, we go to Dareen. This will be our last question for the panel interview. Spotlight you again there, Dareen. So for our parting question for this afternoon's launch webinar, could you share to us what are the effective coordination for child protection to strengthen child-centered preparedness, especially in anticipatory actions, because we want also to emphasize anticipation, our anticipatory actions. So would you have any examples from the region that will tell our audience clearly about it?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Let me first to respond by emphasizing the effectiveness and accountability of humanitarian intervention that is ensured through the humanitarian coordination mechanism that is in place in countries encompassing the cluster approaches and the humanitarian program cycle. I think the effective coordination means fulfilling the core functions of the coordination groups, such as supporting the service delivery, informing strategic planning, capacity building, advocacy, and most importantly, ensuring preparedness. So having said that, effective coordination can reduce child protection risks associated with climate change by supporting and the analysis and identification of the needs and vulnerabilities of children, and strengthening the government leadership in preparedness and response actions, engaging children and community-based groups. So in East Asia and Pacific, there are some of the examples that I can share today, how UNICEF as a lead and co-lead of these country-level child protection coordination groups, working with the national and local actors to enhance child protection integration into DRR and climate action, and supporting their institutional capacity strengthening. So for instance, in Mongolia, UNICEF is working with the National Emergency Management Agency and conducted a review of 56 existing policies and procedures related to DRR and winter preparedness plans, and provided recommendations to enhance the resilience of children and families to shocks. And as a result, 3 local governments developed child-focused DRR and winter preparedness plans that are currently being piloted in the field, with continuous capacity building support provided to the government agencies who also became members of the local child protection emergency cluster teams. And also in the Philippines, UNICEF supported the national government partners on the development of systems and tools that will also strengthen the public finance for children at the subnational level, including local planning and budgeting for child protection mainstreaming in DRR and climate change action. It also supported the government in the development of national communication strategy for youth in climate action to promote children's meaningful engagement in climate action. And similarly, in Vietnam, the national DRR guidance for 63 provinces was developed with a stronger focus on children. With the support of UNICEF, and the government also launched a multi-year project to enhance the resilience of the children and their families to disaster risks and climate change, promoting engagement of children and young people. So in terms of increasing children's engagement and their empowerment, as Grace passionately talked about how essential that is in today's webinar earlier, UNICEF and UNDP jointly launched a project called Youth Environment Living Lab in Malaysia. That project is to promote youth-led climate action and support capacity building of youth in collaboration with the government ministries. And I believe these, beyond these examples, there are more inspiring and innovative initiatives that are being undertaken across the region. And with the strengthened government leadership in child protection coordination and increased community engagement and partnership with young people and children, we will be able to translate these study findings and recommendations into practice to ensure the centrality of child protection across all phases of climate action. And I look forward to learning more from the field on the continuous efforts. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you very much, Doreen. Indeed, hearing those interventions will make you think, a lot of countries are already doing something about child protection in emergencies and climate-related disasters. So I was wondering if there are these interventions, so how come that the research, the findings told us that there are still a lot of things to improve? Maybe these interventions could expand its reach to reach more people, more young people. And it's amazing that from UNICEF, from ASEAN, from APCSS, and from the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, even though we are from different organizations, but we look at the same thing with the same perspectives, that we need to upscale our interventions, we need to upscale our initiatives for climate protection for child protection in climate-related emergencies. So thank you very much for listening to our brief panel discussion. And I hope that you're able to understand and receive some information from the different experts that we were able to invite this afternoon. So now I will turn you over to Hanalala. This has been Mark, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Mark. Excellent discussion and so interesting views, and we also got really concrete examples from different levels and different perspectives on how to coordinate and link different sectors, and also for the engagement and indeed for empowerment of children and youth in the emergencies at all the levels, and especially and increasingly in the disaster-related, climate-related disasters. We are already kind of a minute late, but I would like to ask if there are any questions, maybe one or two we can take before closing the meeting. Maybe just to say that we will now also link the report to the chat box, so it's available for all of you, and we are also hearing the requests of the presentations, and we'll come back to you on that one. The discussion will definitely also go on. We will have also different events and actions coming on this. One of those is a Twitter talk show on March 31st at the same time as this event, so 3 p.m. KL time, 2 Bangkok, 8 Geneva, Central European time. So, but you will be posted for sure. But at this point, I would like to thanks everybody for joining us. But if we don't have any questions, actually, I would like to end this. Thank you from my part, but I would like to also end this. There is one question, Asan.
Hi, my name is Asan. Actually, I want to ask one question from all my team members and from you. Actually, why not we should make a team who can you can say who can travel around the areas and see which peoples are which children are going to working as a labor, and then we should take them to the hospital. Instead, we should take them to schools, education, for education, we should build a team who can reach towards them and teach them from their main time, you can say their relaxed time or their comfort zone, so they don't disturb even their time. Sorry, I cannot explain for more. I think you can understand that we should make a team for volunteers or education team. You know, we have a large volunteers team in all over the world, and we should make a team who can assess these boys who cannot go to school, who cannot go for education purpose, and our team should target these boys, and with their comfort zone we should teach them on their place.
Thank you, Ahmed. Very point. I think also here that the children are in very difficult situations, and also for to addressing them, we really need coordination between different sectors and members and doing the outreach work. Does somebody of them want to comment that more? That's a very important point.
Elena, if I may just address quickly Hassan's question, I think it's a very good point. We didn't have time to detail all the protection risks related to climate change, but we already know, and we highlighted that the prevalence of violence is already super high. And child labor is one of the concrete risks that is even exacerbated in case of climate-related disasters and other kinds of disasters. And the points that were shared about access to education, notably, have a very big impact on the children. And that's why also we're trying to, I think more and more organizations are involved in doing what they call either climate landscape risk assessments or more risk-informed programming, where we take those risks into account. We also improve our response. And this is not only doing referrals, as was mentioned, but ensuring that we can also act ahead of those issues and, if possible, already do some prevention and take mitigation measures when those risks happen. So hopefully with discussions like we have today and also all the programming happening in our respective organizations, this is something that will be improved. And ultimately, it's not about just doing the humanitarian response, but it's very much linking to the development work as well, and ensuring that everything we do is done in synergy and with the ultimate impact being on the resilience of children in the long term. I hope that answers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Audrey. Okay, I think thank you very much for that response. I think it is very well raised, and there are a number of questions, and this is definitely only not the beginning. We already heard that there's lots of happening in different organizations, different sectors working with the child protection, education, and disaster response and preparations. But this is definitely something that we really need to still work, put our own efforts together, and to increasingly partnership coordination work, and especially to participate and engage the children and youth to all the actions that we are taking and all the actions that is concerning them. Please feel free. We have downloaded now the link to the report to the chat box. Please have a go and read it. Feel free to be in touch with us, any of the IPRC colleagues and also the colleagues who have been here presenting today. So definitely we will continue the discussion and actions in the future also. Thank you so much everybody for participating, and wishing you a very good rest of the day. Thank you. And a special thanks for all the speakers and panelists today.